When you meet a man who has a mountain to die on, when you meet a man who cares, it doesn't matter what it is, it could be his wife, it could be his dog, for all I mean. But there is something about a man that you meet when he has this passion, this line, you immediately respect him. And he doesn't have to be a big man, he doesn't have to be a tough man, but you understand that he is a man.
I thought that was an interesting point from Strickland. I'm not going to make the same point, but I've recently been thinking about something similar. I've realized that it's entirely possible for people to go through their entire lives only having a very superficial understanding, surface-level insights about the general nature of the people in their society. You know, you might hear someone make the following observations talking about the community in which they live. They're good people. They're very polite. They seem happy. They're laid back. And it's very possible to have those types of superficial observations without having any real appreciation of the full moral spectrum of the people around you, the great and the terrible aspects of humanity that are just below the surface. Because I think you really only gain access to those insights by having skin in the game, by having a hill to die on. You know, having something in your life that you're prepared to fight for, unfortunately means that sometimes you are going to have to fight for those things. That's part of having skin in the game. The most obvious example would be having a family. Someone tries to mess with that, you're going to fight. This is not a scenario where backing down is even an option. There is no walking away. If you try to build a business, or if you're really invested in a competitive career, you might have to really fight to climb that ladder. You know, there's many examples of how someone can have skin in the game. But the point I'm making is that having things that you really care about and are responsible for can lead the most conflict-averse person headfirst into a war. Now, I'm not making this point to diminish people who don't have skin in the game. In fact, on the contrary, ignorance can be bliss. Because when you have things in your life that you will fight for, and they lead you into fights, what you can find out about the nature and the moral character of people can be so disappointing and so destructive and frustrating and ugly that you really wish you never found out. People can do things that you didn't even think were in play. You didn't even think were on the table. I mean, nobody's perfect. But if you engage in society and you have certain general principles, things like honesty, integrity, a basic sense of morality, well, sometimes you can get tangled up in one of these fights that you cannot avoid, and you realize that those are just ideas. They're not universals. There's people for whom things like honesty and integrity, they're not even considerations. They simply do not exist. These are selfish, greedy people who put themselves first to such an extreme degree that they will completely destroy lives in totally unjustifiable ways just to get what they want. Now, getting tangled up with these people can be a shocking and eye-opening experience, turn you to stone. If it's traumatic enough, a hardened cynic might emerge from the ashes, and you can look back at yourself and think, oh my God, I was like an innocent little boy. I was a babe in the woods. I really had no idea. Now, I'm not suggesting Nate was naive in this instance. In fact, we know he wasn't. But it at least appears, according to the documents, that he did get tangled up with a malignant snake who was playing by his own rules, with only that one unscrupulous ideal guiding his decisions. How do I get what I want, regardless of how it affects anyone else? And that man's name is Solomon Engel, the CEO and founder of Fanmio. So Nate was approached by the company Fanmio and its CEO Solomon Engel, who were interested in promoting a boxing match between Diaz and Masvidal. Nate was interested in the bout, but he and his team were doubtful about the ability of Fanmio to pay. Engel assured Diaz representatives that he was capable of paying and guaranteed the purse regardless of the financial performance of the event. On the basis of that, Diaz entered into an agreement where he would be paid $10 million, $1 million paid up front, and the remaining $9 million paid immediately following the event. One thing worth noting here is that it wasn't $10 million to box. It was $10 million for boxing and marketing services. As this case proceeds, I think that will probably be a meaningful distinction. But the critical information here, $10 million guaranteed regardless of the performance of the event. Throughout this document, you can see that Nate and his team go to extreme lengths to ensure that their purse really was guaranteed. They were clearly nervous. They claim they looked for and received assurances in April, May, and June, including multiple further written assurances in May. Now, some of the details are just awful. In May, Engel both verbally and in writing again guaranteed the money. But this time, they went a step further and claimed it had already been deposited in an independent third-party collection account managed by Salford Corporate Services. So the money was already there. Now that really seems to add a lot of credibility to the idea that they had the money. It's in a Salford account. On May 12th, the owner of Salford contacted Diaz's attorney and confirmed this money had been deposited. Our firm can confirm that either directly or through Salford, it has received amounts in excess of $8.5 million for the Fanmio bouts. Now that is unbelievable. As the document states, Diaz would have never participated in the event if his representatives had not received the foregoing assurances. Like, that was a massively significant thing. But there was one huge red flag here. Can anyone guess who the owner of Salford Corporate Services is? The lawyer of Solomon Engel is also the owner of Salford Corporate Services. My God. Unbelievable how these people operate. They know every trick in the book. You're just dealing with snakes. Honestly, I think this lie is the worst part of the whole thing. But it was immediately followed by the second worst thing. Diaz's representatives persisted beyond this. They claimed that at one point they informed Engel that based on their projections, the event was not going to perform well. We just want to make sure you are not counting on event proceeds as the only way to get it, since I am projecting us to come in low. Now, I believe this was in a conversation, so they may not be able to substantiate that claim in writing, but they alleged that Engel's response to these poor projections was, "Don't worry, Nate is going to be fine. I have said that to you from the start." So in May, they were presenting Engel with the reality that we're now living in. You'd think these projections might cause Engel to come clean, or at least open a dialogue. Maybe try to renegotiate, or just give Nate an opportunity to withdraw from the fight. But even in the face of these low projections, he just doubled down. Terrible. So they stacked lies on top of lies. Reading this document would honestly make you angry. And that's me. Imagine other fighters looking at this. I mean, nobody nailed this topic more than Michael Bisping. I really have to give him credit. He's a fighter, so of course, he's gonna have huge solidarity with a fighter getting ripped off. Bisping just goes off on the lies and the deception and the scamming. This is honestly one of the most righteous rants that I've ever seen in MMA media. Bisping is on fire.
Look, listen, it's a messy business. It really is. And I feel for all parties involved. I'm sure that Fanmio went into this in good faith, thinking that they could put on this blockbuster main event. And by the way, thank you for the hospitality. You took great care of me.
That's right, Bisping. Don't let these motherless Sorry, what did he say?
It was a tremendous event. The production was fantastic. The undercard was great. And thank you very much for the great hospitality.
Thank you for the hospitality. I feel for everyone involved. It's a messy business. I'm sure Fanmio went into this in good faith. Oh my God. But just to address the major point there, they clearly did not go in good faith. This was a scam. Let's just be as clear as possible about what the scam is. They went into this as a pure gamble, totally misleading Nate about the nature of that situation so that they could take that gamble. In the event that the gamble paid off and was a huge success, they would keep the profit. But if this gamble didn't pay off and they incurred losses, they were never going to lose any money because they were planning to declare bankruptcy and have Nate eat the losses. So they were essentially gambling with Nate's money while doing everything in their power to hide that reality from Nate because they knew for a fact he didn't want to gamble. So no, this was not good faith. It was the exact opposite. It was a scammy little gamble. Some of you might think I'm taking Nate's lawyer's side of the story as fact, but the most important parts of this case, they claim they have in writing. Anyway, as we now know, Diaz's team's prediction of coming in low was exactly right. According to Dave Meltzer, the numbers were abysmal, and when Diaz went to collect, all of a sudden Engel is disappointed with the returns, and the guarantees that he offered over and over, well, they went right out the fucking window. Engel despondently groveled that he was going to lose more money than he had anticipated on the event if he paid Diaz what he had promised. He also claimed that his wife might divorce him because of the financial losses. I mean, that's tragic. According to this document, Engel allegedly claimed to have a personal net worth of $80 million. So nobody in the world is going to have an ounce of pity for a woman leaving a man because he's only worth $70 million. You could not find me one single person on this planet who could sympathize with Engel here.
And I sympathize. I really, really do. Nobody wants to see that happen.
Oh, okay. There's one person on the planet. And ultimately, Engel allegedly threatened to declare bankruptcy to avoid paying Diaz. There are some other details of note in the document, but those are the most important ones. There is one really funny thing that emerged in this document about Diaz. Nate repeatedly went out of his way to ensure his money was guaranteed, regardless of the performance of the event. That was the big thing, regardless of the performance, guaranteed over and over and over. But we know from Jorge that the event was initially scheduled for June 1st, which would have seen it competing with UFC 302, which is a disaster. Because as Jorge says, they're MMA fighters, not boxers. But according to Masvidal, Diaz did not want to change dates. He was digging his heels in. It almost sounded like Diaz wanted to give the UFC one last middle finger.
You don't want to go up against other dates and other fight events, especially you don't want to go up against the UFC. So from the beginning, I was trying to switch the date, but he's not a boxer and he doesn't have a boxing fan base. The fan base that he has is from MMA, from UFC. So why go up against our own fan base? Nate's a f***ing idiot. He was adamant about staying on that date because he's not a UFC employee anymore, and I don't have to do nothing for the UFC and this and that and that and this.
So at the time of this interview, you might have been listening to Masvidal and thinking, that's the Diaz we know. Defiant, rebellious, does what he wants, giving the UFC one last middle finger, even though it's going to cost him money. But as we now know from their own document, Diaz's money was guaranteed. He went out of his way to ensure that 1,000,000 times. So he wasn't invested in pay-per-view sales. And I just think that's funny because while Engel was gambling with Diaz's money, Diaz was quite happy to give the UFC the middle finger with Engel's money. I mean, imagine if they had gone up against the UFC. They would have sold 4 pay-per-views. Ultimately, Diaz did comply. I just think it's a funny detail, and it could have fostered some ill will. I mean, imagine you're giving Nate Diaz repeated assurances that his money is guaranteed, and then you want to change dates so that you can avoid a complete financial disaster, and Diaz is like, no, I'm not changing, I don't care, not my problem. That could have been a point where Engel was thinking, fuck this guy. But as I said, Diaz ultimately complied with the request. So this is a moot point. It doesn't justify Engel's actions. I just think it's a very funny detail. Anyway, Engel's move appears to be bankruptcy.
Now he went on to say that he's going to have to file for bankruptcy. And if he does that, well, then he's going to get out of this. All people have to do in this day and age, if they operate a business, they have to incorporate it, they do something, they take out loans. If it doesn't all work out, they just declare themselves bankrupt. It's an absolute cop-out, but it's the way of the system. That's the way the system works. It's bullshit. It is. And it's a shame. And it's not correct. It's a legal loophole that a lot of people use. And I hope that I'm wrong. Nate Diaz is probably going to lose out on $9 million. An absolute travesty. An absolute travesty and heartbreaking, to be quite frank.
Bisping could be right about that. Nate could be about to get stiffed. But it's not the end of the story. Nate potentially has an ace up his sleeve. And it's actually the entire point of this document. Corporate shielding refers to the legal concept that separates the actions and liabilities of a corporation from its shareholders. This principle protects shareholders from being personally liable for the company's debts and obligations, meaning their personal assets are generally not at risk if the corporation faces legal issues or bankruptcy. However, in certain situations, courts can pierce the corporate veil to hold shareholders personally accountable, especially if there's evidence of fraud or misuse of the corporate structure. And that's what Diaz's team is hoping to show. As they say in the document, Engel uses Fanmio as protection for his personal resources. The entity is used as a means to protect Engel from personal liability, while Engel enters contracts under the corporate entity without the intention to honor the obligations, precisely because of corporate shielding. The use of the entity in this manner is improper. So if they can make this case successfully, they may be able to hold Engel personally responsible for the $9 million. And you would have to think that someone guaranteeing the money over and over in writing, essentially creating a risk-free gamble for themselves and going to very deceptive lengths to guarantee the money before a fight, but then as soon as you try to collect, they use bankruptcy as a threat to get you to back down, you would think that would be enough to demonstrate a completely improper use of the corporate shield. So I have to imagine Diaz has a chance. Diaz is seeking $20 million in total for his promotional services, which seems like a joke. But with respect to the $9 million he's owed, I have to think he has a shot. And I am rooting for him more than I've ever rooted for either Diaz brother in anything, because Diaz deserves to be paid. And for all the lies and deception, Engel deserves to pay.